The next step forward in guided reading, Chapter 6, The Fluent Reader. We're Group 4, and we're going to be presenting the first half of Chapter 6, while Group 8 presents the second half of the chapter.
I'm Reagan.
I'm Kylie.
I'm Isa.
There you go, Kylie. Take it away.
Okay. Profile of a fluent reader. Fluent readers rarely make mistakes when reading, but when they do, they use meaning and parts of words to quickly self-correct. Richardson, 2016.
So the good thing about fluent readers is they are experts at decoding. They can decode all day long. That's why they don't make very many mistakes when they're reading, because they have that knowledge of decoding. They have that skill, and when they do rarely make a mistake, they're able to use knowledge about suffixes and affixes to self-correct and figure out what it is that they're trying to say, what it is that they're seeing on the page. So you might wonder, if they're called fluent readers, doesn't that mean they can read all the way? Or does that mean they've reached the top tier? What do they still have to learn? Well, like I was telling you, they are very excellent at decoding at this stage. However, they have not quite yet mastered the skill of reading comprehension. So we have this quote from the Richardson text. Although fluent readers are proficient decoders, they may need to learn strategies for monitoring comprehension and exploring deeper levels of comprehension as texts become longer and more complex. So basically, the reason that it's so important that we teach reading comprehension is if you're not comprehending what you're reading, you're not even really reading. You're just simply reciting words off of paper. So the longer the text get and the more complex the text gets, the more lost our students become, the more they're just reciting words off the paper and the less they're actually reading. So that's why it's important that we teach our students some strategies to support the skill of reading comprehension. And these are 6 basic strategies. These are just the umbrella of each of the strategies that can be used to teach this skill. Each strategy has little, branches that go off of that strategy, and there's many more strategies that go with each one. But our basic strategies are summarizing, and maybe a branch of the summarizing strategy would be using a beginning, middle, end, or a story map. And then we have evaluating author's purpose, drawing conclusions, making inferences, analyzing relationships between characters and ideas, and identifying main ideas and important details. And I think that Group 8 is going to cover exactly how to teach these strategies a little bit more in their presentation. I just wanted to let you guys know, these are these strategies that we're going to eventually get to where we're teaching so that we can support that skill that fluent readers really need to work on. About you have to assess your students to find out what they already know. So here we
Conference with comprehension interview will give you the necessary information to target instruction appropriately.
And then moving on to reflect, after assessing students, you can stop and take some time to reflect and summarize the results, asking yourself, how can I help this student become a better reader? And how will I use this knowledge to guide my next instructional step? And decide, now that you have assessed your fluent readers and reflected on areas of strength and areas for improvement, you can group students and take important instructional steps, such as deciding instructional focus and text selection.
So this is kind of the process that you need to go through before you can even think about beginning guided reading instruction. You have to first, like Kylie said, assess your students, because you don't want to waste instructional time. We already have a very limited amount of time in the school day once you factor in lunch, recess, specials, everything like that. We want to make sure that our students are having time for writing workshop and independent reading time. So to fit guided reading in there, we really have to be smart with our time and make sure that we're making the best of it. And that's why assessment is important. You don't want to reteach things. You don't want to waste time. So this is the process that you follow to kind of plan and structure what your guided reading will look like in your classroom. So when we talk about assessing, you're probably wondering, well, okay, I'll assess my students. That's a great idea. I need to know what they know and what they don't know. But you might be wondering, well, how am I going to do that? So the good thing about our text is it has a lot of different strategies for assessing. One of them for guiding your guided reading is word knowledge inventory. So this is a tool for assessing student knowledge, and specifically it assesses students' understanding of phonics, spelling, and word knowledge, and everything that goes into that. We're talking blends, digraphs, vowels, short vowels, long vowels, everything like that. So when you get ready to provide or give this assessment to your class, it's an assessment that the entire class takes. So when you're administering this assessment, you want to read a list of words off to your students, and something that's very important to make sure this assessment is authentic. You don't want to emphasize or enunciate anything in the word. It's got to be completely natural, naturally spoken. You don't want to emphasize anything because that will skew the results of the assessment. So after the assessment, you'll collect the papers, and then you will use this sheet right here that you can find in Appendix J to help you pinpoint where it is that you need to provide additional instruction, things you need to review, things you need to cover, everything like that. So you can see that on this list of words specifically, the word grab is assessing students' knowledge of short A and initial blends. Of course, you're not going to use just this list. You will change the list up depending on your class, depending on the grade level, the words that you know they know, everything like that. But this is just one of the resources that Jan Richardson provides us in the textbook, and this is located in Appendix J if you would ever like to use it for your classroom.
Assess reading conference with comprehension interview. Reading conference. This is considered the most useful assessment in an individual reading conference. In this assessment, select a level appropriate text for your fluent readers. Have them read the entire passage and make note if they have any difficulty doing so. If they have difficulty, choose an easier passage for them to read. If they have read the passage well, allow them to read a harder passage. After the reading, have a conversation about the passage. Ask questions such as, could you tell me what happens to this character? Or, what else happened? Your goals for this assessment are to identify the instructional level range for guided reading and determine which comprehension strategies you need to teach.
So, Kylie, isn't this kind of similar to a running record assessment?
I would say so, and it's a very personal assessment. You're gonna want to interview your child one-on-one. Right. So this is very personal, and you get to really know your student as a person, as a reader.
Right.
So I really like this conference. It's very personal, and you really get a sense of what your student is strong in and what they are struggling with.
So, and I think I might have read in the textbook, aren't you able to assess them on their own independent reading book?
Yes,
you are.
So,
and then you can kind of find out, how is their ability to choose text for themselves? Are they, something that this strategy doesn't specifically mention, but it does measure, is your students' ability to pick their own text. Are they consistently picking books that are too hard for them and above their level? Are they picking
exactly?
Yeah, are they picking easy books just so that they can, kind of skate through independent reading time? That's something that is important knowledge to have. That way you can kind of guide your student when you may be at the library as a class. You can, steer them in the right direction, make sure they're choosing appropriate text.
Yes, exactly.
And then if you encountered that when you get to the conference and the student has brought their independent reading book, what would you do if you realize that this book is too hard for them? Would you continue the assessment, or would you pull a different book?
We'd probably pull a different book. I'd probably push them to read it, and if they really aren't, being able to comprehend what they're reading, then yes, I'd pull an easier book. Right. And see how well they do with that.
Yeah, right. Because for the purpose of the assessment, you have to have them at a leveled text so that you can truly assess what they're comprehending.
You want to push them, but not to the point where they are hating the reading.
Of course, always. And just for the purpose of the assessment, it has to be a text that is at their appropriate level, or else you won't really be able to get real data from it that you need to make those decisions.
Exactly. So for this part, this is the comprehension interview. It comes after the reading conference. And you're going to assess text difficulty. And you're going to ask the students to read a few paragraphs to you. During the reading, record miscues. If the text is too difficult, select an easier passage. Step 2, assess comprehension. If the oral reading indicates the passage is at an appropriate level, ask the student to continue reading while you follow along with another copy of the text or read over the student's shoulder. Don't take a running record. Tune in to what's happening in the passage so that you have a discussion with the student. Occasionally stop the reading and assess one or more comprehension strategies by using one of the questions on the interview. Prompt the student to explain his or her thinking or give you more details. And then step 3, you're going to reflect and determine steps. Once you've completed the reading conference and comprehension interview, reflect on what you learned. Ask yourself, how can I help this student become a better reader? How will I use this knowledge to guide my instructional next steps?
Right, and I know that we talked about the similarities between this assessment and a running record, but I noticed that Jan Richardson mentions in the text that when you're focusing on the comprehension interview, you don't want to take a running record because since you're allowing your students to bring their independent reading book, you might not be familiar with the book. So it's really important that you pay attention to what it is they're reading so that you can truly understand when you ask the questions for the comprehension video on the next slide. We'll talk about that. Well, I'll bring it up.
Yes.
So when you ask these questions, what she's mentioning is if you're taking a running record, then you're not going to be able to truly assess the student's comprehension because if you don't know what's going on in the text, you have no way of knowing whether or not what they're saying is correct. So then you have no way of understanding and knowing if what they are comprehending is accurate. So then you don't understand their level of comprehension. So that's why even though there are similarities between running record and this assessment, I think it's important that you make sure that you're not taking a running record during this assessment.
Exactly. And you want to follow along while they're reading from the text yourself that they are reading from. So you really get an idea of what they are reading and how good they are reading it. Right. You don't just want to listen to them and then
mark when they're making a mistake.
Yeah, just guess. Well, I think they said that wrong, but I'm not sure. You don't want to do that. So right. You have to be really specific.
I think it would even be hard to take a running record, especially if the student is bringing their independent reading book, because if you don't have the same copy of the book, how can you know that they're making a mistake on the word?
Yeah.
You can obviously use context clues and either pronunciation, but it might be hard if you don't have that copy of a text in front of you. And I also think that's another, maybe a little bit of a con to the idea of them bringing their independent reading book, because you really have to sit there and listen really well to make sure that you know what's going on in the book so that you can grade them on what's going on in the book, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what can help too is maybe getting a copy of the book yourself and then reading the book as they're reading their book, like just having copies of each book that your students get. Mm-hmm. I think that would be really helpful in understanding.
And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money either. I mean, you could just before you do the assessment, if you know that Billy is going to read chapter 1 or chapter 3 of the Hunger Games, you can take their book and just go place it on the copier, and then you have a printout so you can follow along with them and make sure that you're comprehending so that you can measure their comprehension.
Exactly. And basically, these are examples of comprehension interview for narrative text. This is on page 223. And this just gives you a whole layout of how you're going to assess each of your students' ability to read what they are reading.
And comprehend.
Yes, and you're going to ask for a retelling. You're going to note how they are retelling the story. And retelling rubric, it goes from 1 to 5, and 5 is strong, 1 is very limited. And basically that's how you grade how well they are able to retell the story. Like each little detail in the story, they're able to retell to you without having to look at the story.
Right.
And I think that's very important on comprehending, because I remember doing this myself. when I was in elementary school, I had to retell a story, and it was very hard because it wasn't that I didn't understand, it's because I got nervous.
Right.
But when you're one-on-one with your teacher, it is a little bit easier, because if you really trust that teacher, you don't feel so scared to do this with them. So it's important to be very supportive of your student and ask questions that aren't too hard. Like, ask them, what are you wondering? What questions do you have? What confused you?
Like good probing questions?
Yeah, it's very important just to make sure that they don't feel uncomfortable and that they are really giving their all to retelling the story.
And I think that if the retelling, if after, like up here on number 2, when you ask for the retelling, if you're not sure if that retelling was super strong or not, you don't have to go ahead and assign a grade to that right away. You can come down here and ask some of these questions related to comprehension strategies to truly gain a better or deeper understanding of their ability to retell. If you can ask them, tell me in 1 or 2 sentences about what you just read after they retell, that might clear up for you a little bit of, they're a little bit, give you a deeper insight into their understanding. That way you're not grading them based on nervousness, like you said, because the first time you ask them for a retelling, they might be nervous. And something important to remember is these conferences are going to occur pretty early in the year, because this is an assessment that you have to do before you can start guided reading. So it's going to be pretty early on in the year, and we talk about, fostering a positive and welcoming, safe classroom community. That takes time.
Mm-hmm.
So of course you start it on day 1, but it takes time for a student to really know you and feel safe and comfortable with you. So I think that the probing questions that this assessment offers, not only does it assess comprehension and the specific strategies used for comprehension, like summarizing main ideas, inferring and analyzing characters, understanding vocabulary, but also it helps you gain a better understanding and make sure that you're grading them objectively and holistically, and not just on, if they're nervous. Because since it's so early on in the semester or the year, that's a high possibility they might be nervous during this one-on-one conference.
Exactly. You're exactly right. And it's basically the same for informational text. You want to make sure that this text is what they can read and what they feel comfortable reading. That's the most important thing before you even start this comprehension interview.
Right.
And you want to get them to say, how do you feel about this text? This text was easy, no significant errors, slightly challenging, a few errors, too difficult. And for me, if it's too difficult, I wouldn't even go with the rest of it.
Right, you just scrap that and you start again with an easier book so that you can...
Exactly, because they're not going to know.
And it's just a waste of time at that point.
Yeah, basically. And it's basically the same steps that you take with narrative text. And I think it's very important to do both of these. And I don't know, I just really like this reading comprehension. I think it gives you it lets you know your students personally and how they are as readers, and it really gives you a sense of how you should teach them in the classroom.
Definitely. And on top of that, it gives you an insight to what kind of books your kids like, and it gives you when you're able to model and teach reading comprehension, that's when we really start talking about fostering a love for reading. Because up until this point, like we talked about earlier, they've been decoding. And once they can start to develop that reading comprehension skill, they can really start to enjoy the story and love reading. And I can remember when that happened for me. It was around I can remember like comprehending text in around 3rd grade, but around 5th grade was when I really started to like dive into the story and feel that feeling of like being transported into the world of the story. So that, I think that age is something that, when we're starting to actually really develop that reading comprehension skill, that's when we can really start to, develop a little book enthusiast and reading enthusiast. So... But we could hammer on about this all day, so I'll turn it over to Issa and let her talk about the next phase in our process for planning guided reading, which is decide.
All right, and going on to summarizing the assessments, these will help make important decisions about grouping, instructional focus, and text selection. these two assessments right here, these two assessment summary charts, will display the results for both narrative and instructional text. And for level range, the student text level range should be recorded for the genre of text. And under each strategy listed, a student will receive a plus, a check, or a minus. A plus indicates that the student is proficient in the strategy. A check will indicate that they are partially proficient, and a minus will mean that they have limited proficiency in that strategy. And the ones listed are the most common standards and strategies for these genres of text, but they can be added depending on the standards that you're teaching.
Right. You could definitely easily customize this chart in like a Word document, Excel spreadsheet, or even the Google version of that, based on the standards you're teaching for your class, just like you said, Issa. You're absolutely right.
Right. Just like on the informational text, we add a few strategies such as main idea, analyzing relationships, text features, and text structure that we don't include on the narrative.
Right. So.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. You're fine.
No, you're.
Oh, I was just gonna say that this. What's something that's really nice about this sheet is it gives you the ability to look at your whole class at once, and I think this would really flow well into the next slide because since you can see your whole class at once, that will really help you with grouping as you're able to kind of see their instructional range and what they're proficient in, partially proficient in, and what they need extra help in.
Right. And then moving on into grouping, using the data from the assessment summary charts, students should be grouped by their same reading level and similar instructional needs. Groups should be limited to about 6 students so that the teacher can make her way to each one of those students individually and be able to conference with them. And if there are areas where most students are struggling, the teacher can address those strategies in a whole class series of mini lessons, and then target those strategies in guided reading to give students practice with the strategy.
Right.
And instructional focus. A guided reading lesson should incorporate focus based on assessments and teacher observation. Comprehension should be avoided It should be avoided as the focus. Comprehension is the ultimate goal, and the strategies are just to supplement or push the reader forward so that they can start constructing that meaning.
Right, just like we were talking about in class the other week. Basically, in this case, our destination is reading comprehension, and the road that we take to get there is all these strategies, retelling, summarizing, main idea, analyzing characters, everything like that. So basically,
same kind of concept we were talking about in the skills and strategies discussion, just like the strategies get us to be able to do that skill.
Right.
So the strategies should supplement comprehension. And selecting text. When selecting text for fluent readers, they should be short, thought-provoking passages that encourage the students to look deeper and ask questions about their text. The text should have some challenging vocabulary, so not too easy, but it should have select vocabulary in there where they need to ask questions, they need to think deeper, look at context clues, stuff like that, right, and allow students the chance to practice their strategies.
This is like a teacher cheat sheet. Whenever you need to teach the strategy of, identifying main events. Informational texts are great for that. This is just like an awesome thing to have in your teacher toolbox. Jan Richardson is really good about giving us those. So to bring it full circle, we have our assess, reflect, decide model again. So basically, just like we were talking about, it's important to assess your students so that you're not wasting instructional time. And then after you assess, you can reflect. You can say, okay, what do I need to focus on? What do I need to reteach? What do I need to review? What do I need to teach her the first time? What do I need to spend extra time on? And after you have that data in front of you, then you can make those decisions about grouping, about what mini lessons you want to teach, about what texts are best for what students, and everything like that. So again, this is the best model. I think that they might use a little bit different verbiage in the Jan Richardson text, but this is the sum of it. Assess, reflect, decide. So as always, in this class, we've used the Next Step Forward and guided reading to help us format this presentation, and we hope you learned something. And thank you for sitting here and listening to us jammer on for so long. We're glad to have you. Bye, guys.